Rome greeted Elon Musk and Chervanzili's with its signature blend of ancient charm and frenetic energy. The family of five, flanked by a small entourage, arrived at Leonardo da Vinci Airport on a mild morning in early summer. Elon's usual reserved demeanor contrasted with the bubbling excitement of their twin toddlers, Strider and Azure, who were too young to appreciate the gravity of where they were but thrilled nonetheless by the novel sights and sounds. Their youngest, nestled in Shivan's arms, snoozed contentedly, blissfully unaware of the adventure ahead. Their vacation had been planned as a rare escape from their demanding routines. Shirvan, an accomplished tech executive in her own right, had suggested a mix of relaxation and cultural exploration. Elon, ever pragmatic, had hesitated at first. "I'm not exactly the Vatican type," he'd said with a wry smile, only half joking. But Shivan's point was hard to argue with. "We should let the kids see different perspectives," she'd said, even if they were too young to understand. So here they were, winding through the cobbled streets of Rome in a discreet black van. Shirvan had insisted on visiting the Vatican before heading to their luxurious retreat on the Amalfi Coast. "You can't come to Rome and not see it," she'd reasoned. Elon, though indifferent to religious sites, agreed with little protest. "Sure," he'd said. "Let's see what all the fuss is about." Their first stop was Vatican City, a place teeming with history, art, and faith. The sheer scale of St. Peter's Basilica caught even Elon's attention. "Now this is an engineering marvel," he said, craning his neck to take in the massive dome. Shirvan chuckled. "You're thinking about how they built it, right?" "Of course," Elon replied. "No computers, no cranes, just ingenuity. It's impressive whether you believe in the mythology or not." Their guide, a knowledgeable young woman with a talent for storytelling, explained the history of the basilica as they toured. Shirvan listened attentively, occasionally pointing out details to the twins, who were more interested in the echoes their little shoes made on the marble floors. Elon, ever the skeptic, asked pointed questions about the science behind the art. How did Michelangelo manage to paint the Sistine Chapel, ceiling lying down for so long without ruining his neck? The guide laughed. Actually, he stood for most of it, leaning back on scaffolding. Strider and Azure, meanwhile, were captivated by the light streaming through the basilica's grand windows, casting colorful patterns on the floors. Shirvan crouched down to their level, her voice gentle. "Isn't it pretty?" she asked. The twins nodded in unison, their wide eyes reflecting the kaleidoscope of colors. Though Shirvan rarely spoke about religion, she seemed to appreciate the broader significance of the visit. As they passed by Michelangelo's Pieta, she murmured, "There's something deeply human about this. It's not just about faith. It's about creativity and resilience." Elon nodded thoughtfully but remained largely quiet, preferring to observe. He wasn't one to judge belief systems, even if he found them illogical. "Kindness matters more than dogma," he'd said many times. Shirvan shared his pragmatic worldview, but her insistence on this visit wasn't lost on him. It was less about religion and more about fostering open-mindedness in their children. Elon Musk didn't know that he and his family would visit Pope Francis that day. Just watch what happens next. It's unbelievable. Their tour through St. Peter's Basilica had already felt surreal, but when their guide paused in front of a smaller chapel and whispered, "The Pope is here today," Shivan's eyes lit up. Elon raised an eyebrow. "Pope Francis?" he asked, his tone half incredulous. "Yes," the guide replied. "It's not uncommon for him to hold informal sessions here, but it's always unannounced." For a moment Elon hesitated. He wasn't one to seek out religious leaders, but Shivan's curiosity was palpable. "Let's check it out," she said, her voice calm but insistent. The twins, too young to grasp the gravity of the moment, tugged at her hands. They entered the chapel, its atmosphere markedly different from the grandiosity of the main basilica. It was smaller, intimate, and bathed in soft light. In the center stood Pope Francis, his white robe simple and unadorned, speaking to a small audience. The space was quiet, save for the hum of murmured prayers and the occasional shuffle of footsteps. Shivan's gaze was immediately drawn to the ornate woven figure behind the Pope, an intricate piece of craftsmanship that seemed to radiate warmth. "It's beautiful," she whispered, almost to herself. Elon followed her gaze and nodded slightly. "Interesting design," he said. "I wonder what inspired it." His curiosity about the human effort behind such creations often outpaced his disinterest in their religious significance. The guide gestured to a row of empty seats. "You're welcome to sit and listen," she said softly. Despite himself, Elon agreed. They settled into the back row, with Shirvan holding their youngest and the twins squirming on either side. The Pope's voice, gentle yet firm, carried through the room as he shared a reflection on compassion and the strength found in the community. Though Elon tuned in and out of the theological parts, he couldn't help but notice how engaged Shirvan seemed. The session soon shifted to something that caught Elon completely off guard. People from the audience, one by one, stepped forward to share their personal stories, struggles with illness, loss, and moments of joy or transformation. Each story was met with a kind word or blessing from Pope Francis, who listened intently, his empathy evident in his demeanor. Elon, unaccustomed to public displays of vulnerability, was struck by how comfortable these strangers seemed sharing intimate details of their lives. A young woman spoke about her battle with depression and how she found solace in helping others. An elderly man described how he reconciled with his estranged son after years of silence. The stories were raw, personal, and deeply human. Leaning slightly toward Shirvan, Elon murmured, "It's fascinating, isn't it? How people open up like this in front of so many strangers." She nodded, her eyes still fixed on the front of the room. "It's vulnerability," she said quietly. "Sometimes it's easier to share with strangers than people you know. And maybe they feel safe here." Elon didn't reply but mulled over her words. His world was one of facts, innovation, and logic, a far cry from the emotional outpourings he was witnessing. And yet, there was something undeniably compelling about the scene. It wasn't about religion, he realized. It was about connection. The twins, restless from sitting still, began to whisper questions to their parents. "Who's that man?" Strider asked, pointing to the Pope. "Why is everyone talking to him?" Shirvan smiled gently. "He's a leader for a lot of people. They come to him to share their stories and get advice or blessings. It's their way of finding comfort." As the session came to a close, the Pope offered a simple prayer for unity and kindness, his words resonating with the small crowd. Elon, who rarely lingered in moments of sentiment, found himself reflecting on the humility of the scene. It was, in many ways, the opposite of his world. Unpolished, deeply emotional, and centered on faith, and yet it wasn't entirely foreign. In his own way, he valued kindness, connection, and the pursuit of something bigger than oneself. Elon's vague thoughts, swirling with impressions of the chapel and the Pope's words, were interrupted by a story shared by a woman near the front of the gathering. Her voice trembled as she described the loss of her young daughter, a tragedy that had left her family broken in ways words could barely convey. She spoke of long nights spent in despair and prayers that felt like they vanished into the void. And then, after years of pain, she was now pregnant again. Tears streamed down her face as she told the room how she believed God had sent this child as comfort and a reminder of hope. Elon stiffened in his seat, a pang of something raw and familiar rippling through him. He'd lost a child too, Nevada, his firstborn, who had died suddenly of SIDS at just 10 weeks old. That was nearly 2 decades ago, but the memory of it was like an ache buried deep in his chest. He rarely spoke of it, even to those closest to him. For years, he dealt with the grief by burying himself in work, clinging to the belief that progress, science, medicine, and technology could solve the world's greatest problems, even the ones that had taken his son. But as he listened to this woman, he felt an unsettling tug of recognition. He wasn't sure what he believed about faith, but there was something undeniably powerful about her story. The way she spoke, the quiet conviction in her voice. It wasn't just about religion. It was about finding strength in something bigger than her own pain. For the first time, Elon felt a flicker of understanding about why people shared their most personal sorrows in spaces like this. It wasn't about the answers they might receive. It was about the act of unburdening themselves. It was as if the room itself absorbed a part of their sadness, making it just a little easier to carry. He wondered if that was what faith felt like, a sense of shared humanity, a belief that you didn't have to hold everything alone. The thought startled him, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. What would it be like, he wondered, to say out loud the thing he had kept silent for so long? Could he? Would anyone even care to hear it? His train of thought was interrupted by a gentle nudge from Shirvan. "Elon," she whispered, her voice bringing him back to the present. "It's our turn." He blinked, suddenly realizing that families were lining up to meet the Pope for a personal blessing. Shirvan had already stood, balancing their youngest child on her hip, and the twins were tugging at her free hand. The guide gestured toward the front, and without much thought, Elon rose to follow. The line moved quickly, but each family seemed to have their own small moment with the Pope. As they approached, Elon noticed how ordinary the interactions seemed despite the reverence of those around him. There was no pomp, no pretense. Just a man in white robes offering words of comfort and warmth. When it was their turn, Elon stepped forward with his family, a little unsure of what to expect. Pope Francis greeted them with a gentle smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. It was clear he recognized Elon, but there was no mention of fame or titles. Instead, he simply extended his hand in welcome. "Mr. Musk," he said, his voice warm and steady. "It's good to see you here." "And you, Your Holiness," Elon replied, his voice quieter than usual. He wasn't sure why, but the simplicity of the interaction put him at ease. For a moment, it felt like there were just two ordinary people having a conversation. Shirvan introduced herself and the children, her tone soft but cheerful. The Pope bent slightly to greet the twins, who stared at him with wide eyes before shyly hiding behind Shivan's legs. Their youngest, still in her arms, cooed and reached a tiny hand toward him. Pope Francis chuckled softly, touching the baby's hand with his own. The Pope's words were brief but thoughtful. He spoke about the importance of family, the beauty of children, and the power of love in all its forms. Elon listened, nodding occasionally, but his mind kept drifting back to the story of the woman in the audience. He wasn't sure if it was the setting, the stories, or simply the rarity of this kind of quiet moment, but something about it all stayed with him. When the interaction ended, the Pope offered a small blessing, one hand raised over the family. It was a simple gesture, but even Elon, who didn't believe in its spiritual significance, felt a strange sense of calm. As they turned to leave after they received the blessing, Elon turned back to the audience, intending to follow Shirvan and the kids toward the exit. But his gaze caught on something that stopped him in his tracks. Time seemed to slow as his eyes settled on a family sitting a few rows back. A father, a mother, and two children. They were dressed modestly, their clothes slightly worn but clean, and they sat close together, sharing quiet smiles. The youngest child, a boy no older than 5, giggled as his sister whispered something into his ear. The father chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair, while the mother looked on with an expression of serene contentment. Elon felt his chest tighten. For a fleeting moment, everything around him, the low hum of voices, the ornate walls of the chapel, even Shivan's gentle nudging to keep moving, faded into the background. All he could see was this family, seemingly burdened by the weight of the world outside. It wasn't that he thought their lives were perfect. He knew better. These people, like everyone else, likely had jobs to go to, bills to pay, worries about the future. Maybe they were struggling to make ends meet. Maybe they were dealing with illness, loss, or uncertainty. And yet, at this moment, none of that seemed to matter. Here, in this space, they looked free, equal, happy. Elon's mind, always working to analyze and categorize, struggled to make sense of what he was feeling. Was this what faith did? Was it some kind of sanctuary that allowed people to leave their identities and struggles at the door, even if only for a while? Did it strip away the layers of individuality, status, wealth, problems, and leave only the core of what it meant to be human? The thought unsettled him. He had spent his life focused on building solutions, solving problems, and shaping the future through technology and innovation. But this was something entirely different. It wasn't about solving anything. It was about letting go. He wasn't sure why it stuck with him, but it did. Even as they left the chapel and continued their tour of the Vatican, even as the holiday unfolded with its planned luxury and leisure, the image of that family stayed in his mind. He didn't know if it was faith, kindness, or just the power of shared humanity, but whatever it was, it felt significant. And for the first time in a long while, Elon Musk couldn't stop thinking about religion.